So there's a lot of information out there on dyslexia or specific learning disability in reading. And my goal is just to provide you with information about what dyslexia is, how it can be treated, and any additional resources that might be helpful to you. So first of all, what is a reading learning disability? It's a neurodevelopmental disorder, which means that usually manifests early in development, so either before birth or after birth, but just early in development. And so that's the developmental part. The neuro part is the fact that it results from some kind of deficit in the brain, either chemical imbalance or difference in brain structure. And so dyslexia is a neurodevelopmental disorder. It results in deficits in reading and in spelling. Children with dyslexia typically have difficulty recognizing word sounds, and it's usually unexpected in their performance. They usually perform below what they usually perform in other areas such as math, science, writing, which also can be affected by dyslexia, but they aren't performing as expected for their intelligence, as well as their grade level, as well as across all other areas. Their reading is just not up to par with those other areas. So the IDEA definition of a specific learning disability is a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or in using language, spoken or written, that may manifest itself in the imperfect ability to listen, think, speak, read, write, spell, or to do mathematical calculations, including conditions such as perceptual disabilities, brain injury, minimal brain dysfunction, dyslexia, and developmental aphasia. So that might be a little bit too much information, but the remainder of that talks about what dyslexia is not. You kind of have to cancel out all alternative explanations before you can determine it's dyslexia or a specific learning disability. If the student has received all appropriate instruction and they're still not making progress, they may be eligible for special education services, and usually it's in one or more of the following areas. So it can be an oral expression, listening comprehension, written expression, basic reading skills, reading fluency skills, reading comprehension, mathematics calculation, mathematics problem solving. Obviously for dyslexia, the areas impacted are basic reading skills, reading fluency skills, and reading comprehension. The DSM-5 has a very similar description of a specific learning disability. It's a neurodevelopmental disorder. It can occur in individuals who are gifted or individuals who are just, their normal age peers. And then it manifests in areas of reading, writing, or spelling during formal schooling. And for reading, the areas identified are usually in reading fluency and reading comprehension. For writing, the areas identified are spelling, grammar, punctuation, or clarity and organization of writing. Usually for mathematics, they have deficits in number sense, memorization of arithmetic facts, calculation, and accurate math reasoning. And the DSM-5 classifies the severity on a mild, moderate, or severe label. The etiology of dyslexia, as we already discussed, comes from brain structure and function. So there's certain areas of the brain related to processing language And in particular, individuals with dyslexia have deficits in areas related to phonological processing. So they have trouble processing word sounds. And so areas that are related to visual, auditory, and motor abilities are actually impacted by dyslexia. And so there's some other things over here that I'm not going to get into depth in, but basically the process of reading requires the individual to sight read, to recognize visual stimuli, which is, the letters that they're reading on the paper. So first they have to look at that, they have to integrate it into their knowledge of word sounds and be able to understand that in order to read. And so those processes are at a deficit. And then so actually the frontal areas, which are more related to reading comprehension, are overactive because they're overworking those areas, and not the areas that are related to word processing are underactive. Also, an individual who has parents who have dyslexia obviously are more likely to develop this disorder because it's heritable. What's the impact of reading disabilities in the schools? Well, about 5 to 17% of the general population has dyslexia, and 80% of those students that we serve through special education services have some kind of difficulty reading. This has an impact on their academic performance across all areas because reading is so heavily required in, understanding different math concepts, word problems, understanding concepts in science and history, and so you need reading for all of those reasons. Dyslexia also impacts your writing skills, organization, all that kind of stuff. And then individuals with dyslexia are actually more likely to drop out. It impacts their self-esteem, so an individual with dyslexia might just resort to the idea that they're dumb just because they're struggling to read, and whereas it comes easier for other students, and so they might come to that conclusion wrongfully because it has nothing to do with intelligence. So impacts their self-esteem, duty to identify and provide services. So as educators, it's our responsibility to identify these individuals and help treat the disorder. So the remainder of the presentation, I just wanted to cover some targets for intervention. Hopefully this will make it easier to know what to identify. Well, you don't even have to identify this in just an individual with dyslexia. You can use this on all students, and so it's just helpful to know what areas are particularly important for students with dyslexia. So we got phonemic awareness, basic reading, spelling, reading fluency, and one thing that I'm going to add in the future is reading comprehension. That's something one of my professors brought up to me that I needed to include here, so I will eventually add that and discuss that. So phonemic awareness is just an individual's awareness of word sounds in his or her own language. Some of the focuses of intervention or targets for intervention are rhyming, blending, segmentation, phoneme, grapheme, correspondence. So you probably already know what rhyming is. That's great for the age group that you're working with, so preschool, kindergarten, anybody who's in their pre-reading phase. Rhyming is great. Blending is basically just trying to get that student, obviously what it sounds like, to blend a word together. So I would say I I would segment or spell out or sound out the word cat. So cat. I would ask them to respond with the blended version of that word. So what word did I just say? And they would say cat. Segmentation is the reverse of blending, but it uses the same concepts. So I just now use segmentation, but instead of starting with that or leading with that, I would start with the blended word cat. I would say the word cat and say what words or what word sounds do you hear in the word cat? And they would say k, at. So that's kind of the goal of segmentation and blending. Phoneme graphing correspondence is basically connecting word sounds to their symbols or letters. And so in that case you might say S is for snakes and make that letter sound or word sound. So sometimes we have two symbols that make only one word sound. So the example of that is SH. So it's sh. Okay. So different strategies that you can use for phonemic awareness are an Elkanon word box. It's typically used for segmentation. It has an illustration of the word that you're trying to teach. So in this case, it's a cat. And you can use any kind of manipulative, which is just an object that the child might be interested in. You can use word tiles. So if the child is interested in toy cars, you might use like little bitty toy cars. You can print this worksheet out of the Elkanon word box and say, what do you see in this picture? And they'd say, I see a cat in that picture. They might say kitty, whatever. But then you are going to provide them with the word cat and then segment that, and you're going to use whatever object you chose. So in this case it's toy cars, and as you segment that you're going to say k, and you're going to move that object into the box. A, t. And so every time you segment the word, you're moving something into the box to, represent that segmentation and kind of get the child more active in the lesson. Word tiles can be used for both blending and segmentation, as well as phoneme graphing correspondence. So you can either buy these, you can make these, you can have the student make word tiles, however you want to do it. And so you just provide them with a word. So in this case we have cat. And so you start with the words with the words together if you want to segment it, and then have them pull the letters apart as they say the word sounds. So k, a, t. And so you're separating those. That's supposed to represent the segmentation. And then you could do it the opposite way if you want to blend the word together. Okay, and then we have basic reading. So they should be building on those phonemic awareness skills, and then once they're kind of getting the hang of that, you're shifting from just recognizing sounds to recognizing word parts to recognizing whole words. And so that's basically what basic reading is word recognition, beginning to, instead of recognizing just the sounds of words, you are recognizing whole words. So you're shifting from part to whole. So the focus of interventions for basic reading are typically phonics, structural analysis, and word recognition. So phonics is a lot of the techniques that we already have described. And then structural analysis is breaking the word down into its parts so that you can facilitate reading. So you teach word parts and syllables. This is usually helpful when you have larger words or harder words to read. You teach them to break it down. And then word recognition is just sight reading. So pretty much just memorization of words, familiar. So high frequency words and irregular words. And we'll go over what a rapid word card is here in a second. So rapid word reading card, that's what this is right here. So usually start out with a list of words. It can be 6, it can be, you can adapt it to however you want to use it. But it's going to be 6 words that the child is unfamiliar with. If you're working with irregular words, if it's high frequency words, then it might just be 6 high frequency words. But you figure out, what the child is struggling, what words the child are struggling with, provide that list, and then on each row, you use the same words, just in different order. So you start off with, reviewing those words, teaching that student how to say those words. And then you set a timer and you let them read through those words from left to right until they're, you can do it until they're done, but you can also set a 1-minute timer and just have them keep doing it. So that's a rapid word reading card. It's supposed to help with word recognition. Phonics approaches are, like I said, incorporating those ideas of segmentation and blending, phoneme grapheme awareness. But here are the different approaches that you can look at using. Analogy phonics is basically just learning by association. So you're going to use something that the child already knows to teach them more. So you're building on what they already know. So if they know the word lip, you can use the rhyme ip to teach them the word trip. And you can go on and on and on with that. So based off of that one word, you can teach them many different words just by rhyming. That's what analogy phonics is. And then analytic phonics is very similar, except for instead of just using rhymes, you're going to use a whole word, break it down to one word sound, and kind of associate that one word sound with other words. So it says, for example, if the student knows the word house, the ow letter sound relation can be analyzed and applied to unfamiliar words such as loud, mouse, cloud, proud, or pound. So you're basically just looking at the word part and trying to help them learn a new word using that word part. We're not going to go over embedded phonics. Phonics through spelling, phonetic spelling, which I'm assuming won't be much of a deal when you're working with people, or when you're working with children who can't read yet. So if they can't read or spell yet, then this might not be the best thing either. But phonetic spelling is just sounding out a word and spelling the word the way it sounds. Synthetic phonics is similar to the analytic phonics, except for it's kind of backward. Instead of a whole to part approach, we're looking at the parts of words to blend them together. So an example of that would be, I'm trying to think of, let's use summary for example. So summary, so part to whole approach. We're starting with a part of a word and then kind of blending it with the other parts to sound it out. Decodable texts are something that you probably won't use if you're working with preschoolers or kindergartners. But basically they're just easy to read texts that kind of help students learn how to sound out words or word recognition more easily, because they're not having to stumble across words that they don't know very well. Decodable texts basically just use high frequency words and words that the students are probably going to be familiar with, and they can be adjusted to the student's level and that kind of thing. And so they're just going to kind of reinforce what the child already knows and create that the automaticity with learning words or with reading. So obviously, you might not be using, some of these spelling and reading techniques as much, considering you're going to be working with preschoolers or kindergartners. But it's still great to know, how to help individuals with dyslexia who are struggling with spelling. Some of the areas to focus on are phonology, and this goes along with a lot of the things that we've already been learning. So phonemic awareness and basically the ordering of word sounds in order to read and spell. That's what phonology is. So individuals with dyslexia might have issues with phonemic awareness and phoneme grapheme relationships, and that's what phonology is for. Orthography is the child's knowledge of conventional word spellings or irregular word spellings. So you might have to help them in those areas. And then morphology is how you can change the spelling of the word in order to change the meaning of a word. So an example of this is the word girl. If you add an S to that, it makes it plural. It changes the meaning. So we went from just having one girl to having how many ever girls, multiple girls. So usually you would teach common English language rules in that instance. Okay. The main thing you want to focus on with spelling is basically just providing the student with feedback about their spelling mistakes. You can do this by analyzing their spelling test mistakes, creating flow list charts. Here we have an example of a student who has dyslexia on the left in figure 5. So they almost have every word incorrect on the spelling test, and that is not uncommon for somebody who has dyslexia. So if you analyze the different spellings, let's start at number 12. So they spelled exam with an S, so eggs, Sam. So it looks like they're kind of over relying on phonology a little bit. That means that they're phonetically spelling the word out, and they're spelling it exactly how they think it sounds, which is probably a strength of theirs. So if you go up to the number of 11, same thing, exempt. Of course they left out the P, but the S there doesn't belong there. So it looks like they're kind of missing that conventional word spelling aspect of it, which is what orthography is. If you go down to that last word, emphasize, on the very end of the list, right here, it looks like they don't know the irregular word spelling, that PH can also sound like an F, make the F sound. So orthography looks like the weakness for this student, and that's what you would want to mention and try to teach those students those different rules that they don't know about. And then a spelling flow list chart is basically when you take a set of words. It can be words that the student doesn't know. It could just be, a random spelling list that is on the student's level if you don't really know where to start. But if you look to the side, we have 6 words for the very first spelling test. They got they correct, the student got said correct, and the student got people incorrect. So they take a spelling test every single day. That was on Monday. On Tuesday, they got they correct, they got said incorrect. On Wednesday, they got they correct. And then on Thursday, when they got, when they were tested, the word they fell off the list, and then they added a new word, which is were, on Thursday. So basically how it works is you take, you have a set of words. You have to be tested on that same word until you get it correct 3 days in a row. And so that's how a spelling full list, and then it kind of falls off, each word falls off the list, and then you add a new one. And eventually you know all of those words and you begin learning new words. Hope that made sense. Reading fluency is basically how you can create automaticity for reading. The more you practice, basically practice makes perfect, the more the student begins practicing reading, the easier reading becomes to them. It frees up their mind to begin understanding what they're reading. So students with dyslexia have difficulty with reading comprehension, but the more fluent they are in reading, the easier it is for them to understand what they're reading. They're not having to struggle through reading the passage. So the focus for interventions, basically the 3 main parts of reading fluency are accuracy, speed, and prosody. So accuracy is the number of words the student gets correct over the total number of words that they read. And then speed is words correct divided by the number of minutes the student reads. Prosody is how the student expresses what they're reading. So are they paying attention to punctuation? Are they changing the tone of their voice as they read? So if there's a comma, are they pausing? Things like that. So usually when you're working with students who have struggle with reading fluency, you want to establish a baseline before you can do anything. So I kind of just want to do a little demonstration here. I have this website, and it helps you do some assessments for that student. Oral reading fluency passage generator. So you pick a passage that's within that student's reading level, and I'm kind of just, this is just made up stuff for demonstration, but you download it. Basically, it spits out a worksheet that will help you kind of assess where the student is. So this first sheet is your copy. You're going to follow along as the student's reading. And then here's the student copy. You give this to them. You say, okay, so we're going to do some reading today. I want you to do your best reading. If you come across a word that you don't know, that's okay. Just try your best. I might try to help you out if you're struggling. And then you start a timer for however long the student is reading, and when the student is done reading, you stop the timer. And you make notations within the passage when they read a word incorrectly. You want to mark that. You might want to mark once they're done, once a minute has passed, where they were in the passage. And so all that will help you measure what we just talked about over here: accuracy, speed, and prosody. So those are all the things you're measuring as they read through the passage. So you've established a baseline. Types of interventions you can provide are modeling. So you want to model how to appropriately read, and then you want to provide them opportunities to practice and provide feedback as they're reading through the passage. Audio assisted reading can be using an audio tape. So the passage that you're reading has been recorded already, and the student reads along with that passage, or they can read along with you. Partner reading is when the student's peer kind of serves as a model, as well as kind of provides them feedback with a passage that they've read. Reader's theater is when the entire class is provided with a script, and so everybody has their own part and they all read aloud. It helps keep the entire class engaged, and hopefully it helps that student stay engaged. And I know there might be difficulty with that if the student has, low self-esteem or low self-confidence when it comes to reading aloud. There might be a way around that. But speed reading is just like it sounds. So you provide the student with, either a list of words or kind of like that rapid reading card that we looked at earlier, or a passage and they read it as fast as they can. Choral reading is just reading together with that student and making sure that your pace is just a little bit faster than theirs to kind of keep them improving their pace. And that's all for reading fluency. I also have some resources. So I didn't really go over accommodations very much. This website has some additional accommodations for SLDs that might be helpful. Multisensory learning is a lot what it sounds like. So you might have heard of learning styles. It's more accurate to call them learning preferences, because we all have preference for learning. And there hasn't been much evidence to actually substantiate that students learn a better way. Really, it's a mix of all the different learning preferences that is the best method of helping that student learn something in depth. And so that's what multisensory learning is. It uses what it sounds like. It uses all the student senses in order to keep them engaged. And it's very helpful for students with dyslexia. So there's a video on that. Evidence-based programs. So evidence-based programs are just a systematic version of everything that we kind of talked about today. So I gave you kind of the tools, some things that you can target, but these things are research-based intensive programs that start where the student is struggling and kind of works them through the program until they've improved substantially. So there's websites for that. And then progress monitoring and intervention. That website that I provided you earlier, this is the same website. There's some things that I didn't go through, so you might want to click on that and investigate that website a little bit more. Okay. Essentials of Dyslexia Assessment and Intervention was a book I used to put this presentation together. So the majority of my presentation was kind of based from this book. I found it to be a very helpful resource, so I just wanted to share that with you. And then Overcoming Dyslexia is a book that I'm actually going to read. My professor recommended that I share that as a resource in this presentation slide. And so I plan to read that one myself. And if you would like to read that, that would be great. So as I said, my goal was to provide you with an understanding of what a reading learning disability is, kind of go over some of the different interventions, which are phonemic awareness, basic reading, spelling, reading fluency, and like I said, I'm going to have to kind of adapt this presentation and add in reading comprehension, because I kind of missed that. That's a huge chunk of providing interventions for dyslexia. So if you have any questions for me, feel free to ask. I know that a lot of what was in these slides might not pertain to the age group that you're working with, but I still hope that it was helpful to you. And yeah, that's it.